Hello. How is everybody? How are you? I'm just looking at my settings. They look slightly different to what I was expecting. No, that's okay. It's rather warm here, a little bit warmer than I like. So I've got the skylights open and some of the other doors open, but not on the really windy side of the house because otherwise we get blown away and it gets even noisier. The noise at the moment is the wind in the chimney, as usual. I mean, my office hasn't moved. But because I've got the skylights open, I've got parts of me that are getting a bit cool as the breeze just wafts past, and then other parts of me that are getting too hot because they're not getting any breeze at all. Oh, well, we'll get there. And my excitement for me is that today my monitor stand arrived. I was able to order one that I've wanted for a while, which you can put 3 monitors on. I've got 2 at the moment that I use standing on the desk side by side. And I've got a little old one that I can use sideways alongside them if I have something suitable to stand them on. And now I have. So it's one more step towards getting my office all organised and set up the way I want it to. I just need to get all the stuff sorted out so I can do it. But also it will mean that I actually change my office from facing one wall in this space to facing another wall, which is alongside a window, which means that the extra light will be on the front of me, not from behind, which is why I had to put the green screen up, plus hiding all the stuff, Anyway, so hi, if you're new here, I'm Jev. I tend to ramble a lot, but the main reason that you're here is because I read old-fashioned children's stories. It's a bit like bedtime stories, much more like bedtime stories than, say, audiobooks. Some people say, well, what is it like? What do you do? And I have to start by saying you know how you can get an audiobook from the library and listen to that when you're doing other things. It's a bit like that. And there's a lot of people who do listen when they're cooking, when they're doing assignments or work projects that they have to do. Something where you're keeping your eyes and your hands busy, but you want something that engages with your brain just a little bit and is a little bit chatting and soothing in the background. That's the sort of reading I do. The way you would use an audiobook, but not with the quality of an audiobook. The quality is much more like bedtime stories, so there will be interruptions. Often I will explain words that I'm familiar with that probably most of my listeners aren't familiar with, because I grew up listening to really old and reading really old books, ones that my parents and my grandparents had been reading. And I'm a why sort of a kid. Well, I was a why sort of a kid. I'm now a why sort of an adult, where it's like, why? Why is that? What does that mean? And all this sort of thing. So, of course, you learn a lot when you're that sort of person. And when I'm reading, I tend to supply you those sort of answers if I think that that's something that people may not understand. It's just a natural response to a word that is familiar to me, but probably I realise is probably not familiar to a lot of other people. I do a lot of those sort of asides. So that's why I say it's much more like bedtime stories. If you're a parent and you've got children, especially if they're a little bit older now and you're looking back in memories, reading stories to them at bedtime, you'd often be partway through a story, especially once you've got a little bit beyond where they're not able to read themselves, where you're reading just because it's a shared thing that you do together. And you'll be reading something out loud and child will be asking, why did they do that? Or what does that actually mean? Or how did they do that? Or sometimes they'll think of something connected to one object that you've just read about, but not particularly a big feature of the story. And their mind goes off in another direction and they're thinking about it and coming up with all sorts of ideas. Well, in our house, that's what happens, and used to happen more so when they were younger. One of them's not living at home anymore, and the other one, we don't tend to do stories together anymore. We play games, computer games, or watch computer games, read funnies out loud to each other off the internet, that sort of thing. Anyway, so that's the sort of reading I do. That's why I refer to them. If you're here from having seen my Instagram pictures and then notification that I'm going online, you will see that I refer to them in the hashtags as rough reads. I used to refer to them as raw reads, but I call them rough reads. And over on my YouTube channel, in the descriptions of the books, I refer to them. The first thing I state about each of the books that I'm reading is this is a rough read series, just because I don't want people to expect it to be perfect. Susie Cato is brilliant at reading children's stories out loud. If you want them read perfectly with a proper TV children's presenter type voice, go and listen to Susie. She's marvellous. There's generations of children, Kiwi kids, who've grown up watching her on TV, and now she reads children's stories online, among other things. If you want that sort of thing, where it's done beautifully, go and listen to Susie. If you want it just randomly as it comes and you find out strange things and that sort of stuff, then you're in the right place. Welcome. We love having you here. Long may you enjoy being able to come back and listen to more stories. So, with all of that out of the way, we're going to get on with reading. I'm reading the last chapter of Just William by Richmal Crompton. Last chapter because that's the last chapter of the book. And then I have to figure out what we're going to read next. I may, depending on how long this chapter takes, I may actually end up stopping the stream and then restarting it so that it actually shows on my channel as two separate recordings, with the next one, the next story, next book that I'm going to read afterwards. And it's probably going to be a sequel to one of the other books that we've read, that I've given a little bit of time for the stories to breathe, so we don't get overwhelmed by more of the same sort of behaviour. One book at a time, by an author, with a character that behaves in a certain manner. One book at a time is usually enough. You need a bit of room around the stories to really keep enjoying them. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, here we go again. Does she have to read another one of those chapters? Anyway, we're going to read. We're going to read Just William, and I'm going to once again unlock my first generation iPad mini, which still works for book reading and downloading more old-fashioned books of Project Gutenberg, because they're public domain books. So here we go. Just William by Richmal Crompton, Chapter 12, Jumble. Now, remember I finished off last time saying that jumble often is the name for a particular type of sale, like a bring and buy sale, often held in a church hall or the village hall, tables laid out, people bring along stuff or donate stuff. It's all secondhand, obviously, and it's all spread out on these tables, and you just go along and find things that you want, and then you pay for them. And it's called a jumble sale. So let's find out if that's what they actually mean by calling the chapter Jumble. We'll find out. Chapter 12, Jumble. William's father carefully placed the bow and arrow at the back of the library cupboard. That says a lot right there. Then closed the cupboard door and locked it in grim silence. Oh my goodness, what's he done? He's got himself in trouble seriously this time. William's eyes, large, reproachful, and gloomy, followed every movement. 3 windows and Mrs. Clive's cat, all in one morning, began Mr. Brown sternly. I didn't mean to hit that cat, said William earnestly. I didn't, honest. I wouldn't go round teasing cats. They get so mad at you, cats do. It just got in the way. I couldn't stop shooting in time, and I didn't mean to break those windows. I wasn't trying to hit them. I've not hit anything I was trying to hit yet, he said wistfully. I've not got into it. It's just a knack. It just wants practice. Mr. Brown pocketed the key. It's a knack you aren't likely to acquire by practice on this instrument, he said dryly. William wandered out into the garden and looked sadly at the garden wall, but the little girl next door was away and could offer no sympathy, even if he climbed up to his precarious seat on the top. Fate was against him in every way. With a deep sigh, he went out of the garden gate and strolled down the road disconsolately, hands in pockets. Life stretched empty and uninviting before him, without his bow and arrow, and Ginger would have his bow and arrow, Henry would have his bow and arrow, Douglas would have his bow and arrow, he, William alone, would be a thing apart, a social outcast, a boy without a bow and arrow. For bows and arrows were the fashion. If only one of the others would break a window or hit a silly old cat that hadn't seen the sense to keep out of the way. He came to a stile leading into a field and took his seat upon it dejectedly, his elbows on his knees, his chin in his hands. Life was simply not worth living. First interruption. Hello, Theo. I'm busy. Sorry, talking to the cat because he's meowing at me and I have no idea why. The door is open. He's got a almost sad little cry. Meow. Where he's like, hello, I'm here. Don't forget me. Anyway, the interruption was not about the cat. The interruption is style. Do you know what a style is? If you've lived in the country, you possibly do. If you've lived in the city only, you probably don't. A stile is a setup for climbing over a fence or a wall. We've got a post and wire fence that runs between our property and the park next door. And for us to climb over it, the people who look after the park put in a stile for us, because I'm involved with the general help in some ways to do with it, because it used to be family land, it's now a public park. And so as a thank you, one of the things they did was put this stile in. And what it is you've got the wires of the fence, which you have to try and climb over normally, or through. And if you're my size, through isn't a good idea. And if you're my weight, over is not necessarily a good idea. If you ever have to climb a fence, please do it by a big solid post, not one of the little thin battens. The battens are just to keep the wires evenly spaced. They are not strong, they're not fastened into the ground. So find a big post, preferably one in a corner, because they're even stronger, and climb over that way. If there's no stile, but if there is a stile, you're in luck. So our stile is two boards. So one goes through the fence at an angle like this, and the other one goes through the fence at an angle like this, and they're at step heights. So one goes through the fence between the wires, and it's got a post, a small post on each side to hold it up, and you step on it at one end, and then the other one crosses it going the other way, and that's held up the same way, and you step on the end of that one, and then you lift your leg over the top wire, and then you step down those two steps on the other side, and that's a stile. So there you go. And it saves you having to try and find a big post and hoping your foot's not going to slip on the wires when you're swinging your leg over the fence and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, all of that sort of stuff. Just because there's a lot of people who've never experienced climbing a fence, or climbing through a fence, or getting stuck on a fence, or using a stile even. Anyway, so we'll carry on. So life was simply not worth living. A rotten old cat, he said aloud. A rotten old cat, and didn't even hurt it. It made a fuss just out of spite, screaming and carrying on. And windows, as if glass wasn't cheap enough and easy to put in. I could mend them myself if I got the stuff to do it. He stopped. Something was coming down the road. It came jauntily with a light, dancing step. Fox terrier ears cocked, retriever nose raised, collie tail wagging. Slightly dashioned body, a quiver with the joy of life. Sounds like a rather mixed dog. It stopped in front of William with a glad bark of welcome, then stood eager, alert, friendly, a mongrel, unashamed. Rats, fetch 'em out, said William idly. Here you go. There's the dog, and there's William sitting on the fence. See, there's the step part at the bottom. Now, the fence that he's looking at the picture up close, it actually looks like there's a hedge on each side, and then there's a section which is two fence posts and then two wooden rails, and then they've got a step that goes through underneath, so it gets you high enough to be able to climb over it easily and safely. Much more English style of fence system than what we have here in New Zealand. Anyway, Rats, fetch 'em out, said William idly. It gave a little spring and waited, front paws apart, and crouched, a waggish eye upraised to William. William broke off a stick from the hedge and threw it. His visitor darted after it with a shrill bark, took it up, worried it, and threw it into the air, caught it, growled at it, finally brought it back to William and waited, panting, eager, unmistakably grinning, begging for more. William's drooping spirits revived. He descended from his perch and examined its collar. It bore one word, Jumble. Okay, so this is probably a prequel story to most of the other ones we've had, because we know Jumble already. This is how he meets Jumble. Hey, Jumble, he called, setting off down the road. Jumble jumped up and round him, dashed off, dashed back, worried his boots, jumped up at him again with wild, eager friendship, dashed off again, begged for another stick, caught it, rolled over with it, growled at it, then chewed it up and laid the remains at William's feet. Good old chap, said William encouragingly. Good old Jumble. Come on, then. Jumble came on. William walked through the village with a self-conscious air of proud yet careless ownership, while Jumble gambolled around his heels. Every now and then he would turn his head and whistle imperiously to recall his straying protégé from the investigation of ditches and roadside. It was a whistle commanding, controlling, yet withal careless, that William had sometimes practised privately in readiness for the blissful day when fate should present him with a real live dog of his own. So far, fate, in the persons of his father and mother, had been proof against his pleading. Funny that. William passed a blissful morning. Jumble swam in the pond. He fetched sticks out of it. He shook himself violently all over William to shake all the water out of his hair. He barked at a herd of cows. He ran after a hen. He was chased by a cat. He barked at a herd of cows. He pulled down a curtain that was hanging out in a cottage garden to dry. Oopsie. He was mischievous, affectionate, humorous, utterly irresistible, and he completely adopted William. William would turn a corner with a careless swagger, then watch breathlessly to see if the rollicking, frisky little figure would follow, and always it came tearing eagerly after him. William was rather late to lunch. His father and mother and elder brother and sister were just beginning the meal. He slipped quietly and unostentatiously, that means without being fancy, into his seat. His father was reading a newspaper. Mr. Brown always took 2 daily papers, one of which he perused at breakfast and the other at lunch. William, said Mrs. Brown, I do wish you'd be in time, and I do wish you'd brush your hair before you came to table. William raised a hand to perform the operation, but catching sight of its colour, dirty hand, hastily lowered it. No, Ethel dear, I didn't know anyone had taken Lavender Cottage. An artist? How nice. William dear, do sit still. Have they moved in yet? So Ethel is William's sister. So I think his mother is talking to William's sister at the dining table while she's giving William the usual sort of comments she probably makes to him. Yes, said Ethel, they've taken it furnished for 2 months, I think. Oh, my goodness, just look at William's hands. William put his hands under the table and glared at her. Go and wash your hands, dear, said Mrs. Brown patiently. For 11 years she had filled the trying position of William's mother. It had taught her patience. William rose reluctantly. They're not dirty, he said in a tone of righteous indignation. Well, anyway, they've been dirtier other times and you've said nothing. I can't be always washing them, can I? Some sorts of hands get dirty quicker than others, and if you keep on washing, it only makes them worse. And Ethel groaned, and William's father lowered his paper. William withdrew quickly, but with an air of dignity. And just look at his boots, said Ethel as he went, simply caked, and his stockings are soaking wet. You can see it from here. He's been right in the pond by the look of him, and William heard no more. There were moments when he actively disliked Ethel. He returned a few minutes later, shining with cleanliness, his hair brushed fiercely off his face. His nails, murmured Ethel as he sat down. Well, said Mrs. Brown, go on telling us about the new people. William, do hold your knife properly, dear. Yes, Ethel? William finished his meal in silence, then brought forth his momentous announcement. I've got a dog, he said with an air of importance. What sort of a dog? And who gave it to you? Said Robert and Ethel simultaneously. Robert is his brother. No one gave it me, he said. I just got it. It began following me this morning and I couldn't get rid of it. It wouldn't go anyway. It followed me all round the village and it came home with me. I couldn't get rid of it anyhow. Where is it now? Said Mrs. Brown anxiously. In the back garden. Mr. Brown folded up his paper. Digging up my flower beds, I suppose, he said with despairing resignation. He's tied up all right, William reassured him. I tied him to the tree in the middle of the rose bed. The rose bed, groaned his father. Good Lord. Has he had anything to eat? Demanded Robert sternly. Yes, said William, avoiding his mother's eye. I found a few bits of old things for him in the larder. Oops. No wonder he's not looking at his mother. William's father took out his watch and rose from the table. Well, you'd better take it to the police station this afternoon, he said shortly. The police station? Repeated William hoarsely. It's not a lost dog. It just doesn't belong to anyone. At least it didn't, poor thing, he said feelingly. It doesn't want much to make it happy. It can sleep in my room and just eat scraps. Mr. Brown went out without answering. You'll have to take it, you know, William, said Mrs. Brown. So be quick. You know where the police station is, don't you? Shall I come with you? No, thank you, said William hastily. A few minutes later he was walking down to the police station, followed by the still eager Jumble. Oh, that's right. That's what this chapter is called. It's Jumble. It's not a jumble sale. This is the dog. Of course. By the still eager Jumble, who trotted along unconscious of his doom. Upon William's face was a set, stern expression which cleared slightly as he neared the police station. He stood at the gate and looked at Jumble. Jumble placed his front paws ready for a game and wagged his tail. Well, said William, here you are. Here's the police station. Jumble gave a shrill bark. Hurry up with that stick or that race, whichever you like, he seemed to say. Well, go in, said William, nodding his head in the direction of the door. Jumble began to worry a big stone in the road. He rolled it along with his paws, then ran after it with fierce growls. Well, it's the police station, said William. Go in if you want. With that he turned on his heel and walked home without one backward glance. But he walked slowly, with many encouraging "Hey, Jumbles!" and many short commanding whistles, and Jumble trotted happily at his heels. There was no one in the garden. There was no one in the hall. There was no one on the stairs. Fate was for once on William's side. William appeared at the tea table, well washed and brushed, wearing an air of ostentatious virtue that those who knew him best connected with his most daring coups. When he looks like that, there's trouble. What's he done? Did you take that dog to the police station, William? Said William's father. William coughed. Yes, father, he said meekly, with his eyes upon his plate. What did you say about it? Nothing, father. I suppose I'd better spend the evening replanting those rose trees, went on his father bitterly. And William gave him a whole steak and kidney pie, murmured Mrs. Brown. Cook will have to make another for tomorrow. Here we go. This is this is when they were on their way to the police station. Jumble trotted along unconscious of his doom. So there's William not looking the happiest about having to take Jumble to the police station. There's a sign up there that says police station, just in case you forgot. Cook will have to make another for tomorrow. William coughed again politely, but did not raise his eye from his plate. What is that noise? Said Ethel. Listen. They sat, listening intently. There was a dull, grating sound, as of the scratching of wood. "It's upstairs," said Robert with the air of a Sherlock Holmes. Then came a shrill, impatient bark. "It's a dog," said the four of them simultaneously. "It's William's dog." They all turned horrified eyes upon William, who coloured slightly, but continued to eat a piece of cake with an unconvincing air of abstraction. "I thought you said you'd taken that dog to the police station, William," said Mr. Brown sternly. "I did," said William with decision. "I did take it to the police station, and I came home. I suppose it must have got out and come home and gone up to my bedroom." "Where did you leave it? In the police station?" "No, at it, just at the gate." Mr. Brown rose with an air of weariness. "Robert," he said, "will you please see that the animal goes to the police station this evening?" "Yes, father," said Robert with a vindictive glare at William. William followed him upstairs. "Beastly nuisance," muttered Robert. Jumble, who was chewing William's door, greeted them ecstatically. "Look," said William bitterly, "look how it knows one. Nice thing to send a dog that knows one like that to the police station. Mean sort of trick." "Rotten little mongrel," Robert surveyed it coldly. "Rotten little mongrel," he said from the heights of superior knowledge, being the older brother. "He's in his late teens, and Ethel, the older sister, is the oldest, I think. Very late teens or early 20s. Anyway, can't remember." "Mongrel," said William indignantly. "There's just no mongrel about him. Look at him, and he can learn tricks as easy as easy. Look at him sit up and beg. I only taught him this afternoon." He took a biscuit out of his pocket and held it up. Jumble rose unsteadily onto his hind legs and tumbled over backwards. He wagged his tail and grinned, intensely amused. Robert's expression of superiority relaxed. "Do it again," he said. "Not so far back. Here, give it to me. Come on, old chap. That's it. Now stay there, stay there. Good dog. Got any more? Let's try him again." I think William's quite smart, getting his brother involved. During the next 20 minutes, they taught him to sit up and almost taught him trust and paid for. There was certainly a charm about Jumble. Even Robert felt it. Then Ethel's voice came up the stairs. "I'm not quite sure what trust and paid for are as commands for a dog. Does anyone know? You can join our Discord server and tell me what that was all about. That's something I haven't come across before to do with a dog. Trust," I'm writing it down, "and paid for." So Ethel's voice came up the stairs. "Robert, Sydney Bellews come for you." "Blow the wretched dog," said the fickle Robert, rising red and dishevelled from stooping over Jumble. "We were going to walk to Fairfields, and the beastly police station's right out of our way." "I'll take it, Robert," said William kindly. "I will, really." Robert eyed him suspiciously. Wonder why. "Yes, you took it this afternoon, didn't you?" "I will, honest, tonight, Robert. Well, I couldn't, could I? After all this." "I don't know," said Robert darkly. "No one ever knows what you are going to do." Sydney's voice came up the stairs. "Hurry up, old chap. We shall never have time to do it before dark if you aren't quick." "I'll take him, honest, Robert." Robert hesitated and was lost. "Well," he said, "you just mind you do, that's all, or I'll jolly well hear about it. I'll see you do too." So William started off once more toward the police station with Jumble, still blissfully happy, at his heels. William walked slowly, eyes fixed on the ground, brows knit in deep thought. It was very rarely that William admitted himself beaten. "Hello, William." William looked up. Ginger stood before him, holding his bow and arrows ostentatiously. Sounds like it's a key word here. "You've had your bow and arrow took off you," he jeered. William fixed his eye moodily upon him for a minute, then very gradually his eye brightened and his face cleared. William had an idea. "If I give you a dog half-time," he said slowly, "will you give me your bow and arrows half-time?" "Where's your dog?" said Ginger suspiciously. William did not turn his head. Sorry, I'm just moving my coffee cup. William did not turn his head. "There's one behind me, isn't there?" he said anxiously. "Hey, Jumble!" "Oh, yes, he's just come out of the ditch," said Ginger. "Well," continued William, "I'm taking him to the police station, and I'm just going on, and he's following me, and if you take him off me, I won't see you because I won't turn round. And just take hold of his collar, and he's called Jumble, and take him up to the old barn, and we'll keep him there, and join at him, and feed him days and days about, and you let me practice on your bow and arrow. That's fair, isn't it?" Ginger considered thoughtfully. "All right," he said laconically. William walked to the police station without turning round. "Well," whispered Robert sternly that evening, "I took him, Robert. At least I started off with him, but when I got there he'd gone. I looked round and he'd just gone. I couldn't see him anywhere. So I came home." "Well, if he comes to this house again," said Robert, "I'll wring his neck, so just you look out." 2 days later, William sat in the barn on an upturned box, chin in hands, gazing down at Jumble. A paper bag containing Jumble's ration for the day lay beside him. It was his day of ownership. The collecting of Jumble's scraps was a matter of infinite care and trouble. They consisted in a piece of bread that William had managed to slip into his pocket during breakfast, a piece of meat that he had managed to slip into his pocket during dinner, a jam puff stolen from the larder, and a bone removed from the dustbin. So here we go. William sat in the barn gazing down at Jumble. He's thinking hard about the situation. There's Jumble wanting to play, and I think that's probably Ginger, but I'm not sure. We'll find out shortly. Ginger roamed the fields with his bow and arrow while William revelled in the ownership of Jumble. Tomorrow, William would roam the fields with bow and arrow, and Ginger would assume ownership of Jumble. William had spent the morning teaching Jumble several complicated tricks, and adoring him more and more completely each moment. He grudged him bitterly to Ginger, but the charm of the bow and arrow was strong. He wished to terminate the partnership, to resign Ginger's bow and arrow and take the irresistible Jumble wholly to himself. He thought of the bow and arrow in the library cupboard. He thought, planned, plotted, but could find no way out. He did not see a man come to the door of the barn and stand there, leaning against the doorpost, watching him. That's who was in the picture. Thought it was a bit taller than a child. He was a tall man with a thin, lean face and a loose-fitting tweed suit. As his eyes lit upon William and Jumble, they narrowed suddenly, and his mobile lips curved in a slight, unconscious smile. Jumble saw him first and went toward him, wagging his tail. William looked up and scowled ungraciously. The stranger raised his hat. "Good afternoon," he said politely. "Do you remember what you were thinking about just then?" William looked at him with a certain interest, speculating upon his probable insanity. He imagined lunatics were amusing people. Sorry, I want to have my coffee before it's too late for me to have coffee. I hope you've got something nice that you're enjoying having a drink of. And I'm just going to move one of my lights a little. It's too close. Pointing in the right direction, but too close. That's better. Right. William looked at he imagined lunatics were amusing people. Yes, because the chap asked if you knew what you were thinking about just then. Well, if you think of it again and look just like that, I'll give you anything you like. It's a rash promise, but I will. William promptly complied. He quite forgot the presence of the strange man, who took a little block out of his pocket and began to sketch William's inscrutable, brooding face. "Daddy," the man sighed and put away his sketch block. "You'll do it again for me one day, won't you? And I'll keep my promise. Hello." What was his promise? I'll give you anything you like. That's what it was. I'll keep my promise. Hello, he said. A little girl appeared now at the barn door, dainty, dark-eyed and exquisitely dressed. She threw a lightning flash at the occupants of the barn. Daddy, she screamed. It's Jumble. It is Jumble. Oh, you horrid dog-stealing boy. Jumble ran to her with shrill barks of welcome, then ran back to William to reassure him of his undying loyalty. It is Jumble, said the man. He's called Jumble, he explained to William, because he is a jumble. He's all sorts of dog, you know. This is Ninette, my daughter, and my name is Jarrow, and we've taken Lavender Cottage. For 2 months, we're roving vagabonds. We never stay anywhere longer than 2 months, so now you know all about us. Jumble seems to have adopted you. Ninette, my dear, you are completely ousted from Jumble's heart. This gentleman reigns supreme. I didn't steal him, said William indignantly. He just came. He began following me. I didn't want him to. Not just at first, anyway. Not much, anyway, I suppose. A dreadful fear came into his heart. I suppose you want him back. You can keep him for a bit if you want him, can't he, Daddy? Daddy's going to buy me a pom, a dear little white Pomeranian. They're fluffy. When we lost Jumble, I thought I'd rather have a pom. Jumble's so rough, and he's not really a good dog. I mean, he's no pedigree. Then can I keep him just for a bit, said William, his voice husky with eagerness. Oh, yes, I'd much rather have a quieter sort of dog. Would you like to come and see our cottage? It's just over there. William, slightly bewildered but greatly relieved, set off with her. Mr. Jarrow followed slowly behind. It appeared that Miss Ninette Jarrow was rather a wonderful person. She was 11 years old. She had visited every capital in Europe, seen the best art, and heard the best music in each. She had been to every play then on in London. She knew all the newest dances. Do you like Paris? She asked William as they went towards Lavender Cottage. Never been there, said William stolidly, glancing round surreptitiously to see that Jumble was following. She shook her dark curly head from side to side, a little trick she had. You funny boy. Mais parlez-vous français? Mais vous parlez français? N'est-ce pas? Obviously, I don't speak French. William disdained to answer. He whistled to Jumble, who was chasing an imaginary rabbit in a ditch. Can you jazz? She said. I don't know, he said guardedly. I've not tried. I expect I could. She took a few flying, graceful steps with slim, black, silk-encased legs. That's it. I'll teach you at home. We'll dance it to a gramophone. William walked on in silence. She stopped suddenly under a tree and held up her little vivacious, piquant face to him. You can kiss me if you like, she said. William looked at her dispassionately. I don't want to. Thanks, he said politely. Oh, you are a funny boy, she said with a ripple of laughter, and you look so rough and untidy. You're rather like Jumble. Do you like Jumble? Yes, said William. His voice had a sudden quaver in it. His ownership of Jumble was a thing of the past. You can have him for always and always, she said suddenly. Now, kiss me. He kissed her cheek awkwardly with the air of one determined to do his duty, but with a great, glad relief in his heart. I'd love to see you dance, she laughed. You would look funny. She took a few more fairy steps. You've seen Pavlova, haven't you? Dunno. You must know. I mustn't, said William irritably. I might have seen him and not known it was him, mightn't I? She raced back to her father with another ripple of laughter. He's such a funny boy, Daddy. He can't jazz and he's never seen Pavlova and he can't talk French and I've given him Jumble and he didn't want to kiss me. Mr. Jarrow fixed William with a dryly quizzical smile. Beware, young man, he said. She'll try to educate you. I know her. I warn you. As they got to the door of Lavender Cottage, he turned to William. Now just sit and think for a minute. I'll keep my promise. I do like you, said Ninette graciously as he took his departure. You must come again. I'll teach you heaps of things. I think I'd like to marry you when we grow up. You're so restful. William came home the next afternoon to find Mr. Jarrow in the armchair in the library talking to his father. "I was just dry for a subject," he was saying, "at my wits' end when I saw them there. I had a heaven-sent inspiration. Ah, here he is. Nanette wants you to come to tea tomorrow, William. Nanette's given him Jumble. Do you mind?" Turning to Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown swallowed hard. "I'm trying not to," he said. "He kept us all awake last night, but I suppose we'll get used to it." "And I made him a rash promise," went on Mr. Jarrow, "and I'm jolly well going to keep it if it's humanly possible. William, what would you like best in all the world?" William fixed his eyes unflinchingly upon his father. "I'd like my bow and arrows back out of the cupboard," he said firmly. Mr. Jarrow looked at William's father beseechingly. "Don't let me down," he implored. "I'll pay for all the damage." Slowly and with a deep sigh, Mr. Brown drew a bunch of keys from his pocket. "It means that we all go once more in hourly peril of our lives," he said resignedly. After tea, William set off again down the road. The setting sun had turned the sky to gold. There was a soft haze over all the countryside. The clear bird songs filled all the air, and the hedgerows were bursting into summer. And through it all marched William, with a slight swagger, his bow under one arm, his arrows under the other, while at his heels trotted Jumble, eager, playful, adoring, a mongrel unashamed, all sorts of dog, and at William's heart was a proud, radiant happiness. There was a picture in that year's academy that attracted a good deal of attention. The Art Academy show. It was of a boy sitting on an upturned box in a barn, his elbows on his knees, his chin in his hands. He was gazing down at a mongrel dog, and in his freckled face was the solemnity and unconscious, eager wistfulness that is the mark of youth. His untidy, unbrushed hair stood up round his face. The mongrel was looking up, quivering, expectant, trusting, adoring, some reflection of the boy's eager wistfulness showing in the eyes and cocked ears. It was called Friendship. Mrs. Brown went up to see it. She said it wasn't really a good likeness of William, and she wished that they'd made him look a little tidier. The end. There you go. Oh my goodness, that was William. Now, jazz. Can you jazz? In this day and age, jazz is the name of a musical style. We don't think of it as a specific dance or anything like that. But there's it's not a tongue twister, but it can be difficult for some people to say. There's a little rhyme thing that my dad used to say sometimes. I say used to. He's still around. It's just he hasn't said it for ages. When I was a kid growing up, and it was obviously referring to jazz in this way. He said, "Can you jazz?" I said, "Jazz." He said, "Yes." I said, "Who?" He said, "You." I said, "Me." He said, "Yes." I said, "No." He said, "Oh." And I think I got that right. I'll try it again. He said, "Can you jazz?" I said, "Jazz." He said, "Yes." I said, "Who?" He said, "You." He said, "Me." I said, "Me." He said, "Yes." I said, "No." He said, "Oh." And you can try and find it and see where it comes from. I have no idea. But he used to say it really fast. And it was amusing. Jazz. Can you jazz? That was what the reference was to, was jazz as a type of dance. So there you go. I wonder if we're going to meet her again. The Jarrows living for 2 months in Lavender Cottage. I wonder if they'll be in the next William book. Now, we have finished that story,